Totemist. Blood moon over Fuji. I've been struggling to write this for months. My therapist suggests that sharing my experience might help process it, but every time I try, my hands start shaking. Still, I need to tell this story. I owe him that much. Dan and I met at Comic-Con 3 years ago. I was cosplaying as Sailor Moon, and he was just a regular guy who got dragged there by his friend. He admitted later that he thought anime was for lame nerds, but he loved how passionate I was when I talked about it. That was Dan in a nutshell. Always open to new experiences if it meant making someone else happy. Our wedding was perfect. Small, intimate, but meant the world to me. When we discussed honeymoon destinations, Japan was the obvious choice. I dreamed of visiting there since I was 12, and Dan was always up for a faraway adventure. The first 2 weeks were everything I'd imagined. Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, Nagoya. Crowds and festivals and shrines and cute little cafes. Dan fell in love with the culture in his own way. He even started picking up basic phrases, though his pronunciation made our hotel staff stifle a laugh. He would say arigato, as if it was a type of Mexican cat. It was Dan's idea to spend our final weekend closer to nature. "We've seen the cities," he said. "Let's experience the other side of Japan." He'd found a hiking trail near Mount Fuji that allowed camping, and the forecast promised clear skies. The rental shop equipped us with everything we needed. The trail was beautiful, winding through ancient trees that made our forests back home seem young in comparison. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns that reminded me of backgrounds in Miyazaki movies. Dan kept stopping to take photos, saying the lighting was perfect. We were about 2 hours into our hike when we met that old man. He was heading down as we were going up, dressed in proper hiking gear that made our rental equipment look like the tourist grade it was. When he saw us, he paused and spoke in careful English. "You should not camp here tonight," he said, his weathered face creased with concern. "Blood moon tonight. Spirits do not welcome visitors on such nights." I translated his warning for Dan, adding my own understanding of Japanese folklore about the kami and yokai and other supernatural beings. Dan squeezed my hand and thanked the man politely, but once he was out of earshot, we both laughed about it. "Guess we should have checked the lunar calendar for angry spirits before booking," Dan joked, "though a blood moon sounds pretty amazing. I have just the right lens for it." We found a beautiful clearing for our campsite. Dan set up while I got us a cozy fire going. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, and the moon was spectacular, huge and red against the darkening sky. It was like a scene in a movie. Dan was right. It was amazing. We started taking photos. Dan was especially excited about using his new camera, a wedding gift he'd been practicing with for weeks. I was fine with taking selfies with my phone, but after just a few shots, his camera went dark. "That's weird," he muttered, checking the battery. "It was almost full just now." "Must be a vengeful camera yokai," I teased. "I should have gotten you a Nikon after all." Dan smiled, but he was genuinely disappointed. Photography was his creative outlet, and the blood moon was a rare opportunity. The temperature dropped quickly after sunset. We huddled in our sleeping bags, listening to the strange sounds of an unfamiliar forest. Birds and bugs and other critters were singing us a lullaby. We were both drifting off when we heard it. Children's voices, singing something in Japanese that I couldn't quite make out. "What the hell?" Dan whispered. "Kids out here at night?" I grabbed his arm as he started to unzip his sleeping bag. "Dan, please don't. I just want to see what's up. Maybe there's a school trip camping nearby." His voice was gentle, making me feel overly cautious compared to his childlike curiosity. "I'll be right back." I watched the light of his flashlight disappear among the trees. The singing continued, sometimes seeming to come from multiple directions at once. I tried to focus on the words, but they seemed to shift every time I thought I understood them. 15 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. The rational part of my mind tried to stay calm. Dan was an Eagle Scout. He knew how to handle himself outdoors. But with each passing minute, the irrational part grew louder. I remembered the old man's warning, the strange way the camera ran out of battery. Maybe we really shouldn't have been there that night. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the tent. The blood moon hung low and heavy in the sky, casting everything in a red glow that made the shadows deeper. I stayed close to the trail, calling Dan's name in increasingly desperate tones. That's when I found his shirt. It was crumpled on the ground, stained with something dark that looked black in the moonlight. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the material damp and warm against my fingers. I dropped it immediately, bile rising in my throat. The singing grew louder, closer. My flashlight caught something dark on the ground a few feet away. His camera, lens shattered. My flashlight followed a trail deeper into the woods. Each step revealed the rest of his things scattered across the forest floor. His pants, his shoes, his phone, screen broken. The way they were strewn about seemed deliberate, like breadcrumbs leading me forward. The children's singing had stopped. In its place, I heard something moving through the trees, circling me. Rustling sounds, whispering sounds. The branches above me swayed though there was no wind. A child's voice spoke behind me, sweet and clear in the darkness. It asked me something, but I couldn't understand the words. I turned around slowly, my flashlight shaking in my hand. What happened next exists in my memory as fragments, flashes of terror punctuated by darkness. Shapes emerged from the darkness, pale and crawling on too many limbs. They were grinning, wide mouths covered in fresh blood. I ran. I fell. I ran again. Somehow, I found the main trail, then the ranger station. The authorities searched the forest for 3 days. They never found Dan, only his camera and his ring. The camera's battery was completely full when they found it, and there was one final photo taken after all the ones we shot together. I've never looked at it. I never will. The official report calls it a hiking accident, that I was hallucinating out of stress. They said a lot of things, none of which explain what really happened that night. I'm back home now, getting professional help and still struggling to pick the pieces. Sometimes I hold his ring and try to remember him as he was that, but mostly I try not to remember at all. And some nights, when the moonlight shines through the window, I wake up hearing children singing in the distance. A hunger for love. When I first matched with Chio on Bumble, I couldn't believe my luck. Her profile pictures were stunning. Long dark hair, mysterious eyes, a coy smile playing at the corners of her lips. She looked like she could be a model or actress, but her bio said she was just an office worker. I guess I figured someone that beautiful would never swipe right on a shy, introverted guy like me. But there we were, messaging back and forth, our conversation flowing with an easy, natural rhythm as we planned our first date. I was a bundle of nerves and excitement as I waited for her by the lockers in Shibuya Station. I fidgeted with the buttons on my shirt, triple-checked my hair in the reflection of a vending machine. When Chio appeared out of the crowd, gliding toward me with an effortless grace, my heart stuttered in my chest. If anything, she was even more breathtaking in person, moving with fluid elegance in her long coat and heels, an almost ethereal quality to her beauty. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans and flashed what I hoped was a charming smile and not an awkward grimace. "Kenji?" she asked. Her voice was soft, sent tingles down my spine. "I'm Chio. It's so nice to finally meet you." I wish I could say I was as cool as a cucumber, but there's no denying how nervous and dorky I must have sounded. But Chio simply giggled, clearly finding my bashful awkwardness endearing rather than off-putting. We chatted on our way out as of the bustling station, Chio leading the way to a bar she wanted to show me. I was so focused on not saying anything cringy that I barely registered our surroundings. Just followed her through the winding back streets of Shibuya. Before I knew it, we were ducking into a dark, narrow alleyway, the noise and bright lights of the main avenues fading into a muted, distant hum behind us. I frowned slightly, glancing around at the unfamiliar shuttered shops lining the alley. Strange. I'd thought I knew this part of the city like the back of my hand, but I'd never been here before. The bar Chio brought me to looked ordinary enough from the outside, with typical neon signs and dark-tinted windows. But as we entered, I felt the hair on the back of my neck prickle. It was dimly lit inside, with deep red booths and gleaming black countertops. Those drinking at the bar turned to stare at us as we walked in. There was something unsettling about the weight of their eyes on us, in their cold, appraising gazes. The looks lingered just a second too long before sliding away again. I tried to shake off the weird vibe, telling myself I was just being paranoid. If Chio likes this place, it must be cool. I just wasn't getting it. We slid into a booth at the far end, ordered a couple of beers, and kept chatting. I never had a first date going so smoothly. Chio was playfully flirtatious, touching my arm lightly as she laughed at my dumb jokes, giving me inviting looks from beneath long lashes. I couldn't believe this gorgeous, captivating woman seemed so into me and so interested in what I had to say. Everything she shared about herself, childhood memories, funny stories from her job, her hopes and dreams, struck me as utterly fascinating. I was so under her spell. She said she felt a real connection with me, a strong mutual attraction and compatibility, that I was very attractive. Me, attractive. She hoped I wouldn't find her directness off-putting, but she wanted to be upfront about her feelings and interest. She was, as she said, not like other girls. I assured her it didn't bother me at all. She giggled, placing her warm hand on my thigh. I must have blushed and grinned like the happiest fool alive. Everything was perfect. Perhaps too perfect. There was something otherworldly about Chio, the way her teeth looked just a little too white and a little too sharp when she smiled wide, almost like small fangs peeking from pink gums. The way her eyes seemed to gleam in the low light of the bar, the inky dark irises appearing to shift and swirl if I stared too long, morphing and dancing hypnotically. 2 eyes blurring to 4, then 4 to 8. Each time, I blinked hard to refocus. Clearly the beer was stronger than I'd realized if I was starting to see things, but it kept happening, and deep inside me, I started feeling that something was awry. It was too good to be true. She was too beautiful, more than possible. My eyes kept darting to the others at the bar, the way they continued to sneak sidelong glances our way every so often, their faces shadowed and gazes inscrutable. The oppressive, vaguely menacing atmosphere of the bar itself, the very air feeling thick and heavy, unnaturally still, but charged with a disquieting undercurrent I couldn't place. I shifted in the booth, taking a long gulp of my beer, now tasting vaguely sour and metallic on my tongue. My head swam slightly, thoughts becoming more difficult to hang on to, a growing static fuzziness around the edges. Chio noticed my distress and shot me a concerned look that quickly shifted into a sly, almost predatory grin. The flickering neon lights cast strange shadows across the angles of her face, sharpening her features. "Everything okay, Kenji? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice sweet and sticky like honey. And this time, I was certain I wasn't imagining the small, delicate fangs that glinted wicked and sharp behind her curled lips. Heart pounding, I fumbled my words nervously. "I think I might have had too much to drink," I said. "I swear, it seems like you have fangs, or too many eyes sometimes." Her smile was voluptuous, devious even. She leaned towards me, so close that I could feel her breath. I could feel her hand grabbing mine. She lifted it towards her and slowly licked it, her tongue slithering across his skin and back behind long, sharp fangs. My heart was pounding. I couldn't look away from her gaze. Eyes like an abyss, deep and dark and unfathomable. All 8 of them. She moved my hand downward and placed it upon her breast. It was soft and firm and warm. My entire body went stiff for all the wrong reasons. "Oh, Kenji," she said, "nothing's wrong. I've just been lonely for a long time, and I'm very hungry for love. You know what it's like, don't you? Maybe we should go to my place. I'm sure you'll feel better there." I fumbled frantically on my way out of the booth, every inch of my body telling me to get out, now. I sprinted for the door without looking back, almost crashing into tables in my haste. Outside, the night air was cold against my flushed skin. Just a few long strides carried me around the corner and back onto the familiar streets of Shibuya. I slumped against a wall, hands braced on my knees and chest heaving. When I'd finally caught my breath, I looked back over my shoulder, down the darkened alleyway, half expecting to see her sauntering after me with a wicked gleam in her eyes. More eyes than any human should have. But the alley stood empty and silent. No trace of the bar's entrance, I could have sworn, was just there. No sign of Chio. I check Bumble, and her profile is gone. Our chat, gone. Like she never even existed. Even now, weeks later, I can't fully convince myself it was all in my head. The otherworldly, uncanny quality, her beauty, her unsettlingly inviting smile, lips, fangs. I don't know if I'll ever understand what truly happened tonight. If Chia was human at all, or something beyond my comprehension wearing an alluring human mask, I'm not sure I want to know. My instincts tell me I dodged a bullet. Some things are too good to be true. Some thrills just aren't worth chasing. Night in Aokigahara. Friendship is a delicate ecosystem, especially when you're 17. Every interaction is a careful negotiation of vulnerability, trust, and unspoken competition. This is what I've learned from Sakaki, my best friend, my closest confidant, and the person who would ultimately lead me to the most terrifying night of my life. We met in middle school, two awkward girls struggling to find our place. Sakaki was always the braver one, or at least, she presented herself that way. I was the overthinker. Where she would leap, I would calculate. Where she would dare, I would hesitate. Our friendship wasn't traditional. We weren't the type to share every secret or spend endless hours gossiping. Our connection was more complex, a delicate balance of mutual understanding and unspoken competition. Sakaki came from a wealthy family, her parents always working, always absent. I lived in a small apartment with my mother, who worked double shifts at a local hospital to support us. Our differences should have divided us, but instead, they drew us closer. The camping trip to Aokigahara was her idea, of course, though she wouldn't admit it. It started as a casual conversation between classes. Nobody in school actually gone camping there, she said, her eyes sparkling with that familiar mix of challenge and excitement. They always talk about the forest, but who's actually spent a night there? I knew the stories. Everyone does. Aokigahara was the forest at the base of Mount Fuji, with a reputation that stretched far beyond local legends. A place of profound sadness, of lost souls and unspoken tragedies. My grandmother would sometimes tell me about it. Her grandmother told her never to go there, that the woods held secrets beyond human comprehension. But teenage pride is a powerful motivator. The thought of backing down, of showing fear, was more terrifying than the forest itself. We should do it, I heard myself say, the words tumbling out before my brain could intervene. Just for one night. Sakaki's smile was immediate, a mixture of triumph and genuine excitement. My mother was skeptical, but didn't think too much of it. She knew me well and knew I would keep out of trouble. Sakaki's parents, typically disinterested in her activities, didn't even ask for details. I remember thinking how lonely that must feel, to have parents who were more like distant financial sponsors. The day we set out, the sky was overcast, clouds pressing down on the world like a weighted blanket. We chattered the entire way, on the train, and on the bus, and on foot. Nervous chatter, to mask the fear inside. Aokigahara consumed us the moment we entered. The sea of trees was nothing like the urban parks or hiking trails we'd experienced before. These trees were ancient sentinels, their roots twisting across the ground like gnarled fingers. The canopy was so thick that midday felt like perpetual twilight. Silence wasn't absence of sound. It was a living presence pressing against our ears. "This is going to be awesome," Sakaki said. But I caught the slight tremor in her voice. She was just as unnerved as I was, though neither of us would admit it. Our campsite was a small clearing surrounded by massive oak trees. As we set up the tent, I noticed how the branches seemed to lean inward, creating a natural archway. Everything felt intentional, as if the forest was watching, waiting. Night fell quickly. The darkness was different here. Not the comfortable darkness of our bedrooms, but a living, breathing entity that seemed to have texture and weight. Sakaki pulled out her flashlight, a gift from her grandfather that she treasured, and positioned it under her chin. "Want to hear a story?" she asked, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. I should have said no. I should have stopped her. "There's this legend," she began, "about a woman who lived near these woods. Her husband was a no-good drunk and was having an affair with a young girl, a schoolgirl, just like us." The flashlight flickered, casting demonic shadows across her face. "They say she came to these woods and—" "Stop," I interrupted, a wave of unexpected anger rising within me. The story felt too personal, too close to something I couldn't quite name. Sakaki looked disappointed, but said nothing. We settled into our sleeping bags without a word, the tent feeling simultaneously too large and impossibly small. I must have fallen asleep eventually, but when I woke, the air felt different. Sakaki was gone. Her flashlight lay on the tent floor, its beam pointed uselessly at the canvas wall. Sakaki would never leave her flashlight behind. Not here, anyway. She was braver than me, but wasn't a fool. My heart began to race, a rhythm that seemed to echo through the entire forest. The tent's zipper seemed impossibly loud as I emerged into the night. The trees pressed closer now, their branches creating impossible shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. "Sakaki," I called, my voice sounding small and fragile in the massive woodland space. No response. I held the flashlight tight and ventured into the thick of the woods, calling her name again and again, each time feeling less certain that I wanted an answer. That's when I saw them, her clothes, perfectly folded, placed carefully at the base of an enormous oak tree, as if by careful, deliberate hands. Not dropped, not scattered, arranged. "This isn't funny," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Sakaki, stop messing around." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, movement. Behind me, a rustle of fabric, the softest whisper of breath. I turned. The woman stood there, impossibly pale. She wore an old-fashioned white kimono, streaked with something red. A chiseled kitchen knife glinted in her hand. Behind the long black hair that ran down her face were crimson eyes, burning with an emotion beyond rage, beyond fury, a kind of terrible, consuming hatred. "You," she said, her voice like breaking glass. "Another girl. You will join the other soon." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She spoke of betrayal, of a husband who had forgotten his vows, of young girls who didn't understand the destruction they have sown. Her words blended together, a wave of grief and fury that seemed to fill the entire forest. Then she was moving towards me, not walking, but shifting, her body bending and contorting in ways a body could not bend. Something inside me broke through the paralysis. I ran. Branches whipped my face. Roots tried to trip me. The forest itself seemed to be working against me. I ran till dawn broke. I cried until I had no tears left. I never found out what happened to Sakaki, but I dreaded the worst. No one believed my story. Not the police, not my parents, not hers. not the counselors who tried to help me process my so-called trauma. The official report said she decided to end things her own way. I didn't know it at the time, but she was taking antidepressants. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I can still hear the whispers, the soft rustling of leaves that sounds almost like a voice, the memory of an old knife glinting in moonlight. I don't know how, but I even hear Sakaki's final scream.